30 into this area, okay, into when people who are passed away initiate things with us. I mean, that's amazing. You know, that's different than a medium who reaches out, which is also important, but it's interesting. So I'd like to hear from any of you for a moment. I'll repeat back what I hear. Yeah?
I'm going to say what you said, Lori. My mother, when she left in '98, she waited for us to come back from England. We didn't quite make it.
Mm-hmm.
But I had her dentures, and I used to collect her dentures, and people thought that was really weird. But I would still love soundtrack. I've never dreamt about her, never really. Yeah. Oh, no, it's okay. I don't need a microphone. Oh, you can't hear? We have to use
Yeah, if you,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay, I'll hold the mic.
okay.
So I'd like to have some sort of, if you want to call it, communication with my mother.
And one of the things Dan helped me with was communicating with my mother on a certain level because of the lessons that I learned about how dead people can reach us through electronics, which I had seen in his film prior to an experience I had with my mother. And I want to wait for a few more people to come in before I talk about it. But so you're looking, raising your hand too, huh? So
Yes. I have memories of my dad's, his mom, and just all the great times we used to have. Yeah. That's it.
so there's a longing to reconnect, right? That won't necessarily happen in this evening, but this begins to show the reality and the possibility. Yes, Susie?
So, well, my mom, we had an agreement that I have a bunch of mobiles, and so the deal was that she was supposed to jiggle some of these mobiles, and she hasn't done that, and I'm getting a little frustrated. However, she died on the, oh my gosh, all of a sudden, anyway, she died on August, her birthday was August 10th, and she died on the 19th. So on the 19th, I live in the East Bay, and so I was out by the bay, and I was walking around, and I was saying, come on, Mom, just give me a sign, just give me a sign already. We had this agreement, yada, yada. So she had ovarian cancer, and she went to the City of Hope, and then she lived 10 more years. So I'm walking back to my car, and I'm just saying, oh, come on, just give me a sign. And I see something color on the ground, and I look down, and this is what it was.
I'd like to know what it is.
It was a card that says City of Hope.
Uh-huh.
Was on the ground in the parking lot.
Huh.
So I guess she did finally let me know that she's given me a sign.
Well, that's a thing that people report frequently, certain things that are connected with or symbolic of the deceased person. Sometimes it's coins or feathers or that sort of thing. There's a lot of that, yeah.
So I think there's enough people for me to tell my little story. Well, first of all, I had been studying with you and familiar with what you were presenting before my mother died.
Right.
And after my son's father died. And even before that, and going to death doula trainings and other things. And we hosted for 8 years events dealing with near-death experiences here with Ellie Chamber and Lewis Griggs.
Right, yeah.
So what happened for me, first of all, I should let you know that I have both a skeptic and a hopeful believer, and they both live in the same body. And they have to get along with each other, all right? Now, I decided recently that I wanted to support my hopeful believer more, and meet other people's believers, or some people are not even hopeful. They already are believers. But I wanted to tell you what happened. So I already had learned that electronic communication is a possibility. And the first time I tried to communicate with my son's genetic father, and I was unsuccessful. And that relationship had a quality of ambivalence in it, But then, so I kind of abandoned the whole thing. And, I was following your instructions with the tape recorder by the bed and all that. Didn't happen. But then I gave up the whole thing. And here I am in New York. My mother has just died. And I'm taking down her apartment. And I'm packing. And then we made an appointment where I was going to visit my mother's dear hairdresser who loved her very much and who my mother loved very much. So I'm putting together videos, and I never watched TV, but with my mother before she died, we watched stuff on, videos and TV too sometimes, but I had no interest, and the TV was completely empty. And so what happened was as I was gathering the DVDs to show my mother's hairdresser in an appointment, all of a sudden the TV comes on to the channel that my mother and I used to watch. And I mean, she wasn't there, but the channel was there, and I don't even watch TV. And I'm looking at it, and my skeptic said, okay, this must be just chance, And then the other side, the true believer, said, wow, this could be my mother. And I just started crying. And I said, thank you, Mother. This is a sign from you. I love you. And then what I learned from Dan later was turning something on electronically just like that, without some of the more dramatic things that he's going to show in his movie, is kind of like first grade. And I had asked my mother before she died, would she communicate with me? And she was like a full agnostic. So she said no, But I feel like that she felt my love and longing, and she felt her hairdresser's love and longing. And so she decided to do it with the help of more experienced others also on the other side. When you see the movie, you'll see that there are more experienced people who sometimes teach or help the new people on the other side. It's like remarkable. So I think that's about it for me, and I feel it even in my heart and my love for my mother even right now. And I know how some of you may really long to have connections, like Rose, you said that. And I think that the study of, or seeing a medium or practicing some of this stuff that Dan chose in his movie may help. But yet I would say that love is the driver, at least for me. And that's the end of my story.
Thanks, Laurie. And also, it turns out that knowing what's possible makes it more possible.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
As a
great.
general rule.
So you now are all about to see what's possible. Hooray. Okay. All right, so I'm going to put this to the side.
Okay. Thanks, Laurie.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Laurie.
you. You're on, Dan.
Thanks.
My wonderful researcher friend who I've known for so long. Wow, I love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. Well, welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to our evening here at the Sunrise Center. And thanks to all of you watching at home on Zoom. And special thanks to Scott Thomas and Laurie and Rich Davidson and Jacinda Martin and Simon and Kali Fentress here, who have done a wonderful video and Zoom setup here. Fabulous job with that. Here at the Sunrise Center in Corte Madera, California. To briefly introduce myself, I've been a media producer and writer most of my life. As a child, I experienced a number of precognitive dreams, and that led me to question the nature of space and time. And it led to a lifetime of inquiry into phenomena normally considered unusual or inexplicable. This evening, I'm inviting you to join me on a peek into the afterlife. I'm not fond of that term because it sounds like some trivial appendage that's tacked onto our real physical lives. But on the contrary, what we're beginning to suspect is that what we call the afterlife may represent a much more real, vast, and limitless state of being. Our physical lives may be just one more milestone on an endless journey we're all making through the infinite, eternal landscape of being and consciousness. This may sound like a pretty radical statement to some people, but it's supported by the direct experience of millions of people and a growing cadre of fearless scientific explorers who've been willing to see past the materialistic vision of reality that has constrained much of Western science for the past 300 years. This development has unfolded rapidly, particularly since the near-death experience was acknowledged and named about 50 years ago. According to the International Association of Near-Death Studies, between 4 and 10% of people worldwide have experienced near-death experiences. With a lower estimate, 320 million people, the equivalent to the entire population of the United States. During the same time period, there have been renewed attempts to communicate with those who have transitioned to the other side, starting with a modern revival of the spiritualist traditions of the late 19th century. These communication practices have evolved along more contemporary lines into electronic communications with the departed and novel approaches to what's known as physical mediumship. There are other aspects of this. There's a professor at the University of Western Ontario who's doing a major study into messages from the other side received on cell phones, text messages and so forth. That's a whole other thing we won't get into quite yet. Anyway, the film that you're about to see, Calling Earth, is about the discovery of instrumental transcommunication, communication with the other side through modern electronics. The film also includes a trailer for the film we'll be showing next month about the Skoll experiment, most outstanding experiment in physical mediumship ever conducted. We'll be taking a break at about an hour and a quarter for a little Q&A and dialogue, and then diving into the preview of the Skoll movie, which we'll be seeing next month or the next session. I should mention that these documentaries were filmed by myself and my co-producer Tim Coleman between about 2002 and 2010, when we traveled across the US and to several European countries. They took several years to edit, and we released somewhat different versions and so on between 2012 and 2017. So they're slightly dated, but we'll have some updated info for you during the break. I should also mention very briefly that I've been working with an extraordinary team of mediums, but we'll talk about that after we watch the film. So some folks have been arriving here and are just getting seated. So right. It was the starting time. We apologize for that. It was published differently in different places, but 7:30 is when we will start the film. And thanks for bearing with us. Okay. Yeah, let's let everyone get settled in and comfortable, and then we'll roll the film. Yes, a question. Yes.
If we could get everybody to settle into their seat, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Pardon?
Is the hospice movement in some way brought up in this film?
No, this deals with a whole other area of afterlife communication. Right. Thanks. Okay.
Fantastic. We're just getting everybody seated here. Hey, Scott, how many people do we have online right now?
We've got 13 people in the Zoom room. So a big hello, and some of them are multiple people. So welcome to Diara, Lynn, Leaf, Mark, Martine, George, Tim, Karen, Abigail, Ruth, Susan, and Jennifer Blum, also known as Adora.
And we got about 24 people here live in the event.
Okay. Yes, Lord.
Yeah, just
You can add, Lori has a question.
I'd like to know who heard about this on our email. Okay, and who heard about it through seeing a poster somewhere? No? Okay. And who heard about it through Scott's Zoom?
who heard about it through social media?
Okay. Through Dan. Great, wonderful. All right, that's all. Just checking.
Okay, we've got a few more people coming in, and it's...
If we could get people kind of scrunch in to the left, we are getting a couple more people into the space, so which is fantastic.
You know, we planned this to increase the suspense, you see. Yeah, the anticipation.
My dog will be acting as a medium, connecting with your ancestors. Her name is Sophia.
No, while we're waiting, I could also mention something else that I've been involved in that may interest everyone here. For the past 5-6 years, I've been very closely involved with a remarkable team of mediums. And we have created a website called cosmicvoices.network. Cosmic Voices, one word, .network. And there are quite a number of fascinating messages on this website. Jean Love, one of the mediums, grew up in Los Angeles, and she's a professionally trained singer, and she's had a very good connection with the artists and performers community. And when folks in that community pass over, they know her name over there on the other side. And very often, these folks will check in within weeks of their passing with the most amazing messages about their experience in life and their experience of passing and their experience of the other side. So I won't say too much about that or mention any names yet, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you visit this website. Cosmic Voices, one word, cosmicvoices.network. It's not .net, it's .network. Cosmicvoices.network. So I think we're just about ready now. And so, Simon, I think we can roll the film.
Now, according to science, when you physically die and when your brain stops functioning, that is it. That is the end. That's the end of consciousness.
One day in the summer of 2002, Martha Copeland of Lawrenceville, Georgia, played back a sound recording she'd made earlier that day and heard the voice of her daughter Kathy disciplining her dog. That wouldn't have been so unusual, except that 6 months earlier, Kathy had died in an auto accident. In September 2005, Vicki Talbot of Bellingham, Washington, received a message on her answering machine from her son, Braden. Braden had been dead for over 4 years. In January 1994, Mark Macy of Boulder, Colorado, received a telephone call. The caller identified himself as a European psychologist named Konstantin Raudeva.
This is Konstantin Raudeva speaking.
Dr. Raudeva had been dead for 20 years. One day in October 1987, Claude and Ellen Thorlund of Sweden switched on their TV. Suddenly, this strange image appeared, and they quickly snapped it with their Polaroid camera. Only later did they learn that their friend Friedrich Jürgensen, a pioneering afterlife researcher who had died a few days earlier, was being buried at that very moment, 250 miles away. For more than a half-century, people throughout the world claim to have communicated with the dead using instruments of modern technology, such as tape recorders, radios, telephones, computers, and video systems. They call this phenomenon instrumental transcommunication, or ITC.
I think the reason that they choose to communicate with us like this is because this is the electronics age. This is what we accept.
The structure of the human voice.
In recent years, ITC has increasingly captured the attention of serious researchers, including doctors, engineers, and physicists, as well as scientific investigators of the paranormal. It has given rise to books, scientific reports, and international conferences held on both sides of the Atlantic. What's really going on here? Mainstream science tells us that nothing survives the death of our physical bodies. But that doesn't stop the flow of whispered voices, images, and verifiable information that seems to be flooding in from what some believe to be human minds inhabiting another dimension of existence. Is it possible that materialistic science has been misinterpreting the nature of human consciousness, and therefore dismissing valid evidence for the conscious survival of physical death?
Science is a method of inquiry, not an ideology. And at present there are many scientists who believe in materialism, but this is really a belief structure or a philosophy. And science as a method of inquiry doesn't have to be committed to a particular worldview.
Science appears to preclude the possibility of an afterlife, but science evolves and there's no knowing what possibilities may be acceptable to a future science.
After 26 years of doing research and investigation in this field, I've concluded that there's more than enough evidence that there is life after death, that we survive our body's deaths.
The notion that hard evidence for an afterlife might be staring us in the face may be a stretch for most scientists. But that hasn't discouraged many respected researchers from studying such phenomena as near-death and out-of-body experiences, reincarnation, mediumship, and instrumental transcommunication. At the grassroots of this growing movement, practitioners around the globe claim to be conversing with the deceased through the most common and accessible form of ITC. It's known as the electronic voice phenomenon.
A brief definition of the electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP as we call it, would be the existence of voices of unknown origin which appear in tape recordings particularly, but could also be recorded in other ways. When I first heard EVP, the EVP that I produced and I knew was real and not just something that people said, it changed my whole life in that I then really wanted to devote my work and what talents I have to researching this thing.
Electronics engineer Alexander McRae lives on the Isle of Skye off the coast of Scotland. A leading expert in voice communication systems, he developed speech enhancers for the space shuttle and voice links for the London Underground. When he first heard about EVP, he was convinced it was an alarming fraud aimed at exploiting the vulnerability of the bereaved.
I'd had a high-level security clearance in the UK and the US, so, I'd been into some quite fancy things, but I didn't believe this.
With his expertise in speech communications, he started recording EVP in an attempt to discredit it.
And then one evening, to my great surprise, with some equipment I was developing at the time, I heard a voice. My reaction was not fear, but something close to it. I was really startled.
McRae was even more amazed when he discovered additional voices on the same tape.
The first one was actually my father's voice. And what he said, I recognized the voice, what he said was a typical phrase that he used. He used it so much, in fact, that it became his nickname. So I became reasonably convinced that this was the electronic voice phenomenon that people had been talking about.
After 25 years of research, McRae is one of the world's leading experts in EVP.
What my research has convinced me is that there is another dimension to our existence, and that includes life after death.
EVP was apparently first noticed in the early 20th century, when unexplained messages were said to have appeared in telegraph, telephone, and early sound recording systems. As communication technologies developed, the idea of using them to contact the souls of the departed fired the interest of a number of well-known scientists and inventors, including Alexander Graham Bell, Nikola Tesla, and even Thomas Edison, who proposed building a device to capture spirit voices. In 1939, Attila von Soleil, an American photographer, claimed some success at EVP using a phonograph record cutter, and in the 1940s with a primitive wire recorder, a precursor to the modern tape machine that recorded sounds on spools of thin magnetic wire. In 1952, while editing wire recordings of Gregorian chants, two Italian priests, Agostino Gemelli and Pellegrino Ernetti, inadvertently picked up the voice of Gemelli's deceased father. Because traditional religious strictures forbid communication with the dead, the two fathers feared that they had committed a mortal sin. But they were greatly relieved when Pope Pius XII declared the recording a major discovery, one that might lead to new scientific studies for confirming the existence of an afterlife. Then, as tape recorders became popular in the 1950s, people reported hearing mysterious voices in their recordings. At first, no one took these strange intrusions seriously, and they were dismissed as the random pickup of stray radio broadcasts. The first person to research EVP in depth was the Swedish artist and filmmaker Fredrik Jürgensen. In 1959, he was using his portable recorder to tape nocturnal bird sounds for a documentary. On playing back the tape, along with the sounds of the birds, he was amazed to hear faint voices discussing nocturnal bird sounds. Convinced that he was recording messages from the dead, Jürgensen devoted the rest of his life to researching the phenomenon. He went on to record thousands of voices in several languages, established that they often interacted with the experimenter, and published his findings in several books. One of Jürgensen's pupils and collaborators was the Latvian psychologist and philosopher Konstantin Raudava. After working with Jürgensen, he too became convinced that EVP was the dead speaking. Raudava worked endlessly to persuade scientists and the public that with simple recording equipment it was possible for the dead to speak to the living. During his lifetime, he recorded 70,000 voices in 6 different languages, and published the first book on EVP in English. In 1971, he released this phonograph record to promote his book.
The voice then calls the experimenter's name, Konstantin Raudive. The experimenter states that in his opinion, man cannot grasp the events after death with his intellect. A voice replies in German, kann. He can. In another recording, the experimenter remarks that people do not believe in life after death, and a voice answers, so sind sie. German, that's how they are.
Raudava's voices triggered interest across the world, and especially in Europe. German physicist Ernst Zinkowski was an early EVP experimenter.
I began in 1976, and after the second or third test, I immediately got voices saying, we are the dead, we are alive, we are able to think and to speak.
I am one of more than 1,000
German persons engage in communication experiments with the so-called dead. Well, one of the first extraordinary voices I received 14 days after I started was the voice of my late father. And he addressed me with my nickname he used when I was a little boy.
In the U.S., Sarah Estep was EVP's leading pioneer. She made hundreds of her own recordings and published her own groundbreaking book, Voices of Eternity. In 1982, she founded the world's first organization devoted to the study of EVP, the American Association for Electronic Voice Phenomena, now known as Association Transcommunication. Today, the organization is based in Reno, Nevada, and is directed by Lisa Butler, a psychologist, and Tom Butler, a communications engineer.
The function of the association is to provide objective evidence that we survive death. It is also a community of researchers and people that are just interested in the phenomena.
After reading Estep's book, the Butlers became fascinated with the possibility of recording voices of the deceased. Following Estep's instructions on how to obtain EVP, they soon began to get results.
Hearing the first EVP was absolutely amazing. I don't think I slept for 3 nights.
Like many who experiment with EVP, the Butlers discovered that some of the voices were familiar.
At the end of the recording, we said, is there anybody else that would like to say something? And here was this voice that I recognized immediately as my mother.
I immediately recognized it as being her mother's voice, and I understood exactly what it said. The importance of that is just unspeakable. When I heard it for the first time myself, I was actually first a little unnerved, and then as an electronic engineer, there was a task of trying to figure out how could that possibly be occurring? Where could the voices be coming from, and how would they be in the electronics? So the rest of my life, I guess, I'm going to be spending trying to answer those questions.
Probably the main benefit of EVP is solace to the bereaved.
I think the highest thing that EVP can do for anyone is help through the grieving process. You don't have the person in the physical, but a relationship can continue.
20-year-old Kathy Amos of Lawrenceville, Georgia, often called Kat, was a bright, lively young woman. Though badly mauled by a dog as a young child, she recovered fully and never developed a fear of dogs. Indeed, animals were one of Kathy's passions. Following a serious car accident from which they miraculously escaped unharmed, Kathy and a cousin of hers made a pact that whoever died first would try to contact the other. Unbeknownst to her cousin, Kathy had been studying the electronic voice phenomenon. Tragically, within a month, another auto accident claimed Kathy's life. 5 months later, while surfing the internet, Kathy's cousin discovered EVP for herself and implored Kathy to speak through the computer. Suddenly, she heard a whispered voice. Soon, Kathy's mother, Martha Copeland, was recording her own messages from Kathy. Many of Kathy's messages seemed to reflect her love for animals. One day, as she often did, Martha switched on her recorder at home and went out shopping. When she returned, Kathy's dog had made a mess of the house. When Martha checked the recording, she heard Kathy's voice admonishing the dog. A similar incident produced the following EVP. After searching the internet, Martha discovered the AAEVP and joined immediately. Soon she was sharing recording tips and EVP samples with Karen Mossy of New Hampshire, whose son Rob had died of a brain injury.
Rob, missing you, pal.
Before long, other names and voices began to show up in their recordings.
Feeling spirit.
The name Braden popped up repeatedly.
I know, great.
But neither Martha nor Karen knew anyone named Braden. Only later did they learn that Vicki Talbot of Washington State had lost her son in a kayaking accident and had just joined the organization. Her son's name was Braden.
Braden died on March 11th, 2001. He was 20 years old. He was with his best friend Jim, who was also 20, and they were out kayaking in Bellingham Bay, and they just never came home. One of the members said that they had gotten an EVP 2 weeks prior to my joining that said, "It's Braden." Braden had already joined this group that I had subsequently joined, and that he was just waiting for me to join. Then I thought, well, if he's communicating in that way, I'm going to actually try this. When I started receiving messages from Braden, my whole grieving process took a turn. Certainly I continued to grieve, but there was this sense of excitement. To actually hear from him just thrilled me beyond belief, and I knew then that there was the possibility that I would continue to hear from him.
Happy birthday.
One of the first messages I got from him was, again, him saying, "Mom," very clearly twice. He's just as funny as he always was.
What do you know that I don't?
One night when I was feeling very sorry for myself, I recorded a message from Braden saying, "Sorry, Mom, but I lost everybody. Sorry for being crabby." And that gave me a whole new perspective. You know, they miss their family and their friends, and they love them.
Love you. Happy New Year.
Braden continues to come through on the answering machine occasionally. And last October, one of his friends called. Her name is Rachel. And right before she begins to speak, he calls her Sweet Pea, which was a term of endearment that we use for each other and for his friends.
Hey, Vicki, this is Rachel.
And then after she hangs up, Jim says she has hung up.
Before long, this core group of Vicki Talbot, Martha Copeland, and Karen Mossy expanded into its own national organization, whose members record every other Thursday and share the results over the internet. They claim that their children on the other side have formed a group they call the Big Circle, which their parents on this side have adopted as the name for their own organization. Members say they often receive messages from the children of other members, suggesting that they had found one another and are teaching each other how to contact their loved ones among the living.
If somebody came up to me in the street and said, "There's nothing paranormal about EVP," I would say, well, I believe in experimental evidence. I've done at least 20 years and hundreds of experiments, and I know that it is a paranormal effect. Now, how many experiments have you done?
Skeptics insist that there's nothing paranormal about EVP. But are these dismissals based on a genuine understanding of the phenomenon, or are they simply expressions of unscientific prejudice? Let's take a look. One of the most common skeptical explanations for EVP is pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns or hear meaningful words when in reality none exist. Is it possible that EVP is just misidentified noise? That may be true of some EVPs known as Class C, which are often quite indistinct. But according to Alexander McRae, even Class C EVPs can be successfully verified by the use of voice prints.
You create a voice print of the EVP utterance, and then you say the same thing as you think is being said in the EVP utterance. So if you now have two voice prints, and you just visually compare one with the other, and if they match, you're correct.
Another way to understand Class C recordings is to work with panels of experienced listeners.
You tend to find that the consensus will be among experienced listeners or trained listeners. Let's say they were ship's radio operators, people like that, who were used to listening to difficult sentences.
Yet another way to make Class C samples more intelligible is digital filtering. And finally, some Class C recordings may be inferred by their context. The previous EVP, for example, was received when Dr. Konstantin Raudova attempted to contact the deceased Russian poet Vladimir Mayakovsky. EVP samples in Class B are more intelligible than those in Class C, and most listeners usually agree on what they say. And Class A samples are crystal clear.
Once earthly Jenny, once earthly Jenny.
So while some EVPs might be the product of projection or wishful thinking, pareidolia fails as a blanket explanation for EVP. Another skeptical claim is that EVP practitioners are simply unaware of other people's voices in their environment, which on playback they mistake for EVP. However, EVP is usually recorded in very private circumstances. It has also been received on recorders from which the built-in microphones have been removed, as well as personal computers and other equipment, such as Alexander McRae's device, that have no microphones, and therefore cannot pick up any natural voices. Background voices can also be positively identified by the use of a second recorder. Curiously, the same EVP will not show up on more than one recorder at a time, so any sounds picked up by both recorders can be ruled out as EVP. By far the most common skeptical claim is that EVP voices are nothing but the random pickup of stray broadcast signals. But EVP researchers point out that recorders can pick up radio signals only under very rare and limited conditions. They also cite many other reasons why the radio pickup theory falls short. The fact that most EVP occurs in short durations is also evidence against the theory that it is radio pickup.
If the phenomenon of EVP was just a random event, then you'd be as likely to get very short phrases and very long ones, say half a second for some and 2 hours for another. But no, they all tend to cluster round about 1 3/4 seconds in length.
It's like you are standing on one side of a river, and on the other side there's another person, and you are just calling hello. And then the contact breaks down.
Does this short time window help explain why so many EVP communications seem to be phrased in a sort of poetic shorthand? One of the most obvious and consistent characteristics of EVP phrases is that they are whole statements.
They begin with the first word of the sentence and end with the last word of the sentence. And that is against all probability of just being a chance event. And that does indicate that somebody is trying to communicate. And then there is the fact that you don't pick up music normally, whereas a lot of broadcast output in this country and elsewhere consists of music, you know. So it was just straight pick up, where's all the music?
People who practice EVP often discover an apparent interactivity between themselves and the voices recorded.
She asked if there was anyone that wanted to speak, and there's a voice.
If radio pickup were the source of EVP, This would be astronomically improbable.
It'll answer questions that you ask. It'll respond, make comments about things that you're doing.
We were in a location that was supposed to be haunted, and it was very dark. I had turned on a pin light to see if the recorder was working. When we listened back to the tape, we were very surprised to hear this voice.
Another aspect of EVP interactivity is the frequent appearance of pet names, nicknames, and other private information known only to the deceased and to relatives or close friends.
One example occurred with a Scottish physicist called Archie MacDonald, whose wife had recently died. Her name was Margaret. Now, we made a recording, and he said he heard a message from his voice, and I analysed it at home. And I said, sorry, Archie, it's from somebody called Molly. He says, yes, but that was a pet name that I had for Margaret, his wife. And that to me was really good evidence. I didn't know that.
If I recognise the voice, the manner of speaking, the context that the speaker is speaking in, the remarks that are made which are pertinent to my life or perhaps what I've been doing or sometimes even what I'm thinking, to me, that's evidence enough.
Further evidence against the radio pickup theory comes from the fact that EVP almost always presents itself in the language or languages understood by the experimenter, regardless of the location.
If you record it in another country where it's not an English-speaking country, but all you understand is English, you will record English EVP.
I took the device to Spain. I used it in Spain. And from my background, I know that you can't receive any radio broadcasts in English. Certainly not in that place at that time, you couldn't do that. And so any pickup should be in Spanish, but it wasn't. It was all in English.
Radio broadcasts tend to reproduce the human voice fairly accurately, but forensic analysis shows that typical EVP voices do not originate in a human vocal tract. Instead, they seem to have been synthesized in ways we don't yet understand.
My department is involved in the analysis of EVP and ITC phenomena.
Paolo Presi is an industrial engineer and a founding member of Il Laboratorio, a research organization based in Bologna, Italy, dedicated to the scientific analysis of instrumental transcommunication and EVP in particular. Presi and his colleagues have pushed the envelope of rigorous scientific research on EVP, using state-of-the-art electronic instruments and forensic software to analyze EVP voices. Presi says that determining the origin of these voices is beyond the scope of his laboratory work, but that their structural analyses point to a distinctly paranormal origin. Some researchers, like Alexander McRae, have built their own equipment to test the validity of the radio pickup theory.
With my system, there's a local transmitter which drowns out all the other radio broadcasts. They just do not record.
Even though this system completely eliminates the pickup of broadcast signals, McRae is still able to record EVP. Determined to test the radio pickup theory once and for all, McRae traveled to the United States.
I took the device to a laboratory in California, and this laboratory was shielded against radio waves and also against sound waves. So inside the laboratory, you couldn't pick up anything.
It's a very high impedance.
But yet the device still produced voices.
The final recourse of the skeptic is simply to declare EVP a hoax. But there's no actual evidence for this as a blanket explanation. On the contrary, there seems to be an abundance of scientific evidence in its favor, and hoaxing seems to be an extremely unlikely motive when so many individuals have been obtaining results for so long and virtually all have shunned publicity. There are also huge odds against grassroots EVP practitioners having the expertise to electronically synthesize the voices that appear in their recordings. Researchers say that the final argument against hoaxing is that you can try EVP yourself. Since the method of obtaining EVP is technically simple, testing its validity can be done by anyone.
To find out whether something is genuine, you have to do it yourself, because then you do not depend upon believing other people.
There's no guarantees you're going to make the contact. There's no guarantees that those on the other side will want to make the contact with you. But on the other hand, maybe they will, and in most cases they probably will. So try it. Try it for yourself and see what you get.
Researchers and practitioners stress that EVP is not difficult to achieve, and that you can begin with an ordinary cassette recorder and some brand new tapes that have never been recorded.
Use whatever you've got available. Don't go out and spend a bunch of money. But if you don't have something that records, this is a basic setup. This is an analog recorder. It's very inexpensive. It has analog buttons that makes it easy when you find an EVP to go back and listen to it again. It has a counter on it. The counter allows you to note where the EVP is. With a cassette recorder, you want to use a standalone microphone because the internal motor of the cassette recorder is noisy and will cover up your EVP. You always want to use a set of headphones. Usually in the beginning, the voices are very soft, so the headphones help you hear the soft voices.
Many EVP practitioners report that these digital memo recorders are especially effective at capturing EVP voices. Some practitioners skip the recorder entirely and record directly on their computers using readily available audio software.
You can record EVP anywhere. When you're starting out, we would suggest that you pick a spot and start recording at the same time each day and in the same spot. It's kind of like they know your intention by doing that. We would suggest that you ask a question and then you simply give those on the other side time to answer back.
You tape this for a short time, maybe a few seconds, maybe a minute, and then you stop recording, you play back, and you listen to that what you find on this tape.
You need to listen very closely in the beginning. Usually the voices start out as merely whispers. It's interesting, after you do this for a while, the voices will actually become louder and become stronger. With EVP, you actually have three things going on. You have the individual, you have the spirits on the other side communicating, and you have the device in which the communication comes through. We feel like the individual and the spirits on the other side are the most important parts of the circuit. The equipment seems to be the least important.
Some practitioners prefer dim light to calm their minds and minimize distractions from the environment. Others find meditation to be helpful in clearing their minds and focusing on making the contact. Researchers say that some EVP voices seem to be formed out of available background noise, so the chances of getting clear EVP in quiet environments can sometimes be enhanced by adding a small amount of broad-spectrum background noise. For example, from a white noise generator or a small electric fan.
The three most important points when doing EVP research are: one, to keep to the same time of day as far as possible, keep a regular appointment almost. The next one is if you have an emotional bond with the person you're trying to reach, then that does help an awful lot. And the third one is to communicate yourself. Don't just sit silently, ask questions. If you do that, you can double the number of responses that you get.
When the phenomena expanded into pictures, faxes, computer messages, actual phone calls, another term had to be coined, and that became instrumental transcommunication, or ITC, which basically means communication through instruments.
Technical writer Mark Macy of Boulder, Colorado, has been one of America's foremost investigators and advocates of instrumental transcommunication. He has written and published several books on the subject, and his website, worlditc.org, is a rich source of ITC history, lore, and information. He has performed his own EVP and ITC experiments and has traveled widely, giving lectures and presentations.
And they try to modulate those sounds into a voice.
In October 1995, a colleague in the small European country of Luxembourg sent a message to Macy that purported to be one of many that had appeared on her home computer. As with the home tape recorder in the 1950s, the advent of the personal computer in the 1980s and 90s gave rise to claims of anomalous messages that seemed to appear out of nowhere, often on simple machines that had no connection to an outside network. This message, addressed to Mark Macy and one of his collaborators, claimed to be from an obscure journalist named Arthur Beckwith, who was born in England in 1832, was married in Jamaica, and eventually settled in Brooklyn, New York. He died the same day the Titanic sank in 1912.
I hired a private investigator in England to look up the records of Arthur Beckwith in that area, and Arthur Beckwith turned out to be born in 1832. Arthur mentioned in his letter that he was employed by the Sun and the Brooklyn Daily Eagle and the Citizen. So I went to the public library in Brooklyn, New York, and we found out that sure enough, Arthur Beckwith was employed on those newspapers, and we found his obituary. A colleague of mine went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Census records showed that Arthur Beckwith was a 68-year-old widower in the year 1900, living at 150 Schermerhorn Street in Brooklyn. Arthur also mentioned a man in his letter named Bill H. Lynch, who had been a rector at St. John's Roman Catholic Church in Lambertville, New Jersey. So we went to that New Jersey church, and sure enough, we found a record of William Lynch, who was a rector at that church at the time.
Do people actually receive phone calls from the other side? In the 1970s, two veteran parapsychologists, Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless, set out to answer this question. After investigating numerous cases across the U.S., they concluded that phantom phone calls were not only real, but also surprisingly common, estimating that hundreds were received every year in the U.S. alone. As with other forms of ITC, people claim that they clearly recognize the voices of deceased friends and loved ones. Physicist Ernst Senkowski is among several researchers who claim to have received phone calls from the dead. In 1976, while working at his home in Germany, he claims to have received a call from video ITC experimenter Klaus Schreiber, who had been dead for several years.
He came through with his voice on my telephone, and it was the absolutely clear voice of Klaus Schreiber. And I was, for a moment, astonished. And then I said, Klaus, do you allow that I record it? And he said, yes. And then he said, please give my greetings to Rainer Holbe, with whom he co-worked already during lifetime.
Und sag auch dem Rainer Holbe Bescheid, dass die Verbindung geklappt hat.
Es ist fantastisch, lieber Klaus. And to the people in Luxembourg, they will be very glad.
Die Leute aus Luxemburg werden sich freuen.
And then Klaus, I asked him, did you ever try to get in contact with other people? And he said, naturally.
Klaus, hast du versucht, dich manchmal über Radio zu melden?
Selbstverständlich.
But I have here somebody who wants to speak to you. And I give him the device. And you hear something like rattling.
Aber ich habe hier jemand, der sich bei dir melden will. Ernst, ich gebe ihm das Gerät.
And then a Roman Catholic cardinal came through.
Hier, hallo.
Ja,
Hier Augustin Lund.
Augustin Lund.
Dank für Ihre Bemühungen.
And I was dialoguing with him, and he quoted a sentence which my late father used when he had some struggling about the National Socialists. He was not a man of any party, but he did not like them. And he used a special sentence from his home country, Eastern Prussia. And this was quoted by this cardinal. And he said, I know your father. He told me, and then came this sentence. It's a very nasty sentence. Literally translated, it means, I cleaned his stomach. What does it mean? It means I told him the truth.
Ihr Vater, ich kenne ihn. Sagte mir, man hat den Menschen den Magen rein gemacht.
Ja, das hat gesagt.
But I never used it. My wife did not know it. My children did not know it. My father died in 1959. There is no one who is able to use this sentence and send it to me via telephone. My wife was listening downstairs. So it's not my hallucination or my illusion. It has been taped by the answering machine and witnessed by my wife. So there is no way out, believe me. This is reality. And if somebody, maybe the greatest scientist, refuses to take it, it is his problem, not my problem. Sorry.
There's actually a tradition of ITC researchers passing on, going to the other side, and then contacting researchers on this side.
According to many ITC researchers, the undisputed champion among afterlife communicators is the Latvian-born experimenter Konstantin Raudava, a psychologist, philosopher, professor, and author who spoke a half-dozen languages and died in 1974.
There are literally scores, possibly hundreds of people who received his voice through electronic voice phenomenon. And he's spoken dozens of times through radio and telephone.
This is Konstantin Raudava speaking. Konstantin Raudava. I'm as fine as a dead one can be. Macy, my dear friend, whispering greetings to colleague Meek and Yapus. Morning, this is George Meek. This is Konstantin Raudava. George, my friend, at last we succeeded in contacting you. This is the first bridge we succeeded to build to the States. Mark was contacted.
It was a spring morning in 1992 when I received my first telephone call from the other side, from Konstantin Raudava.
Mark Macy had been preparing to conduct an ITC experiment involving very low-frequency radio transmissions. According to Macy, the caller identified himself as Raudava and offered advice regarding his experiment. He had no way to record phone calls at the time, but he was prepared when the caller rang again.
Hello? Yes. I'll try to make it clearer this time. It's a VLF receiving converter. Okay. You simply connect the VLF converter to your HF radius antenna input and a suitable VLF antenna.
The conversation lasted for several minutes. The caller's voice was clear as a bell, and his advice regarding Macy's experiment was sophisticated and technically impeccable.
10-24500 kilohertz respectively. Okay. Wonderful. Technical advice from this side. Thank you very much, Konstantin.
These conversations weren't limited to technical advice. They often touched on human social issues and suggested that the insights provided by ITC might lead to a more just and peaceful world.
You know how dangerous acts of all kinds can be. Violence. That's one of those things we want to prevent by
For the past half-century, instrumental transcommunication has generated keen interest among practitioners and researchers worldwide. International conferences held in the United States and Europe have drawn ITC experimenters, scientists, engineers, psychologists, and medical doctors from around the world who share their experiences, present the results of their research work, and discuss methods for better understanding the nature and meaning of ITC. One such conference was held in 2004 in the bustling port city of Vigo, situated on Spain's Atlantic coast. The conference was co-sponsored by a local development bank and by the locally published ITC Journal. The keynote address was given by the city's vice mayor, who's also a medical doctor.
We are living constantly with physical death, and yet there is always the underlying enigma as to what happens after physical death.
Sometimes the information is information that adds to our body of knowledge and even predictive.
Those phenomena have been with us for a long time, and we have, by mistake, thought of them as paranormal.
This first division of sounds into different auditory types can be settled on the discrepancy between the periodic and the aperiodic vibrations.
The conference was directed by Dr. Annabella Cardoso, a career diplomat who is a successful ITC practitioner and publishes the ITC Journal in English, Spanish, and Portuguese.
I got introduced to the subject by a couple who had lost their only son in a sailing accident here in the Bay of Vigo, who requested my help just in the sense of speaking with them about any possibility of life after death. We started after having been to Madrid to speak with a Jesuit priest who is quite an authority on the paranormal. And he said, well, my best suggestion for you is to try instrumental transcommunication. So I just started experimenting, and I got such important and relevant results that naturally the study of this discipline is very important to me.
J'ai perdu ma première épouse, Annick, en 1988.
Speaking at Dr. Cardoso's International ITC Conference, Jacques Blanc-Garin explains that he lost his first wife in 1988. In 1992, after discovering EVP, he and his present wife, Monique, founded an organization known as Infinitude, Infinity, which links over 1,000 EVP practitioners throughout Europe. The organization's main purpose is to help the grieving connect with their loved ones who have passed. They also publicize EVP, train people in its use, and provide networking opportunities for practitioners in France, throughout Europe, and beyond. They also promote research into EVP and ITC aimed at improving the quality of the results. At the Vigo conference, the Blanc-Garins presented some of their members' EVP samples. For several years, Dr. Annabella Cardoso conducted successful EVP sessions at her home in Spain. Her library includes hundreds of tapes that document the results of her experiments. In 1998, during an EVP session, Dr. Cardoso was using one of her older radios to provide white noise for an EVP experiment. Suddenly, out of the radio came a direct response to one of her remarks, spoken in her native Portuguese.
Está aqui o Picas o gatinho. Está aqui o Picas o gatinho.
Dr. Cardoso says that these voices have often called her by her childhood nickname, Bella.
They always call me Bella. Bella was my child's name. I am Annabella. My family, still today, they call me Bella. Bella. Sim, tu ouvi? Sim?
Since DRV voices come out of radio receivers, couldn't stray radio broadcasts be the source of these apparent communications?
I would say to the skeptic that stray radio emissions do not reply to you when you ask who is speaking. Stray radio emission will not tell you it's your brother Luis. I mean, that's nonsense.
The theory that direct radio voices are in fact the dead speaking is strongly supported when they are clearly recognized as those of deceased friends or relatives.
Anche per quelli che non credono, certamente questo spirito può chiamare.
Marcella Bacci of Grosseto, Italy, is the world's most successful practitioner of DRV. Since the 1940s, Bacci has been picking up the voices of the deceased on old vacuum tube radio receivers. Over 60 years later, his radios continue to produce copious voices in a variety of languages that thousands of people have sworn are those of their loved ones and can engage them in meaningful two-way conversation. In this 2002 documentary produced by Italian-Swiss television, parents of deceased children bear witness to the voices received through Bacci's radio.
Ciao, Marco, ciao, ti abbraccio. Quindi lo squarcio di azzurro che abbiamo avuto è stato notevole.
Ho detto, mamma Milena, ascolti Massimiliano. E quindi se io avessi avuto dei dubbi, quella sera proprio me li sarei levati tutti perché nessuno mi conosceva.
In over 6 decades, Bacci has never charged for his services or accepted a single donation. Scientists and researchers from around the world have investigated Bacci. Engineer Paolo Presi and his colleagues from Il Laboratorio have been investigating him since 1974. To date, no one has ever found the slightest evidence of fraud.
The voices that are coming from out of his radio are very astonishing because the content level is very high in respect of the culture of Mr. Bacci, because he was only a businessman with a shop of washing machines, radio, and so on.
Despite nearly 4 decades of accumulated evidence, some skeptics still insist that the voices could be faked by transmitting them from a remote location. But repeated scientific analyses have ruled this out and have also established that the voices themselves are highly anomalous and do not originate in a human vocal tract.
From my point of view, is the top expression of instrumental transcommunication. I know him in 1974, and I frequently visit him in Grosseto.
In 2004, a group of afterlife researchers, including Dr. Annabella Cardoso, Professor David Fontana, Robin Foy, and physicist Mario Festa, joined engineer Paolo Presi for a session at Bacci's Center in Grosseto.
Il 5 dicembre del 2004.
Dove vai Erardo Bacci? In questo universo niente perisce, cambia semplicemente uomo.
Initially, the voices emerging from Bacci's radio spoke in Italian, but then Bacci reminded them about his English-speaking guests.
Senti, ci sono anche degli inglesi, degli amici, che vengono da molto lontano.
Sorry, Bacci.
David, yes?
David.
Ciao, David. I say ciao to you. Can you speak to me again in English, friend?
David Fontana. Annabella Cardoso. Thank you for all your hard work. Congratulations.
È un fatto medianico, una cosa che c'è sempre stata, l'uomo l'ha sempre avuta. È un regalo che ci hanno fatto per vedere chi siamo, che però non si è sciupato tutto come si è sciupata la nostra terra, si è inquinato tutto noi.
L'uomo non deve sentirsi autorizzato a fare ciò che la tecnologia, la scienza mette a sua disposizione.
late 1800s, practical photography had become a reality and was soon to be accepted as an art. In this somber photograph made in 1858 by Henry Peach Robinson, a young woman is seen on her deathbed. But its artistic value lay mainly in its being the world's first photomontage, in which 5 negatives were combined seamlessly to form a single image. But art soon gave way to opportunism and opened a Pandora's box brimming with alleged spirit photos that were arguably or patently fraudulent. Techniques included multiple exposures, multiple negatives, and even primitive hand drawings and paintings. The alleged spirit faces and figures were depicted with a naive literalism, displaying none of the softness or subtle distortions seen consistently in the most convincing examples of visual ITC. Often the original photo had been pre-composed to allow for the insertion of these alleged spirits. Though some early spirit photos might have been legitimately paranormal, by the close of the 19th century, photography and fraud had truly become a marriage made in heaven. Fast forward now to the mid-20th century, when electronic photography, in the form of television, became widely available. EVP pioneer Friedrich Jürgensen was among the first to recognize its potential as a means of communicating with the departed, and often predicted that images from the other side would soon appear on television screens. Jürgensen spent his later years in the southern Swedish town of Hur, and died in October 1987. At the exact moment of his burial, his friends Claude and Ellen Thorlin, who lived about 250 miles to the north near Stockholm, experienced a strange phenomenon. According to Mrs. Thorlin, she heard an inner voice prompting her to switch on her TV and tune it to an unused channel. As she did so, the screen went dark. Then a spot of light appeared which grew into this image. As if to fulfill his own prediction, Jürgensen had apparently projected a fair likeness of himself onto the Thorlins' television screen, which they captured in this Polaroid photograph. But Jürgensen was not the first to produce images of the deceased on a television screen. That honor probably belongs to Klaus Schreiber of Aachen, Germany. In his youth, Schreiber had experienced deep poverty. Later in life, he suffered the loss of 8 close relatives, including his beloved daughter Karen, all within the span of a few years. Though plagued by ill health himself, he maintained a positive outlook, and in 1982 began experimenting with EVP. In one communication from a deceased relative, he was advised to try working with video. Today we take video recording for granted, but in the 70s and 80s it required clumsy, expensive videotape equipment. Trained as a saddlesmith, Schreiber understood little about this technology and at first was unsuccessful. But following further EVP advice from the other side, and with some help and encouragement from electrical engineer Martin Wenzel, Schreiber constructed a video feedback loop, which produced highly unstable forms that he was told could be manipulated by those on the other side. By 1984, Schreiber's perseverance paid off, and he began to receive many remarkable images. By laboriously advancing his tapes frame by frame, Schreiber was able to isolate and study these single images or short sequences in which the pictures would often emerge from random shapes. Since he had no means of editing his tapes, he simply rephotographed these clips onto a second videotape to preserve them. Some of Schreiber's video images were of unknown individuals or groups, but others were recognized as prominent figures, such as King Ludwig of Bavaria, Albert Einstein, Cistercian abbot Alois Wiesinger, German actresses Hildegard Schäfer and Romy Schneider, whose image we can see developing in this sequence of video frames. Not surprisingly, Konstantin Raudova himself made several brief appearances on Schreiber's video screen. But most intriguing of all were the images Schreiber identified as deceased relatives, including his grandfather, his mother Katerina, his sister Maria, a cousin of his son Robert, who died at age 22, his deceased wives Gertrude and Agnes, and his daughter Karen, who had died at the age of 16 after a difficult illness. Could all these images have been hoaxed? During a broadcast discussion about ITC on Luxembourg television, here's what German engineer Martin Wenzel said about Schreiber's work, as translated by Dr. Ernst Zinkowski.
Mr. Wenzel, it is in the nature of man, and it is good so, to be basically skeptical. Then one is able to inform oneself, and yet remaining skeptical, one may research. You controlled Schreiber's equipment and wrote a report? Yes. When Klaus Schreiber published his first images or presented them in the public, he invited me to visit his laboratory and observe everything, how he is working. He revealed everything. I could check anything down to the smallest cable. There was nothing hidden in any way, and I had to see that he worked without any tricks. It's only a very unconventional way to use a video camera.
In January 1988, following a second heart attack, Schreiber passed away, and within a few months apparently began communicating with his colleagues on Earth.
Afterwards, apparently Klaus Schreiber sent an image through the transcommunication station in Luxembourg. And this image appeared in a computer system. So it was digitized, and it is clearly to be seen that it is Klaus Schreiber.
Rievenich, Germany, was the site of numerous ITC experiments during the 1980s and 90s. Here, Dutch TV personality Tineke de Nooi interviews Rievenich experimenter Adolf Hommes.
Ich habe Jürgensen kennengelernt damals in meiner Anfangsphase meiner sogenannten Forschung.
Ja.
Und habe das Buch von Jürgensen.
Hommes' early work focused on EVP and direct radio voice, which produced, among others, the following communication. Then, working with colleague Friedrich Malkoff, Hommes began experimenting with an old television set that had no connection to an antenna. Eventually, the experimenters received several striking pictures, including this one of Anne de Guigné, a young French girl who died in 1922 and is now venerated by the Catholic Church. And this one of Elisa Carolina Hommes, Adolf's mother, who had died shortly after his birth in 1935. According to Hommes and Malkoff, in numerous EVP contacts, Elisa had been serving as a communicator for an ITC contact group that was working from the other side to contact practitioners on this side. Vicky Talbot reports that late one night in July 2006, her television set turned itself on and off several times, and displayed various black and white scenes of people asking to engage in two-way conversation with her. She says that, in her astonishment, and in the dark, she was unable to find her camera in time to capture this sequence of events. But she did eventually manage to snap one picture of the TV image, showing several youthful faces, before the episode ended. Here it is with some of the distortion removed, and here with some of the noise removed. Vicky says she now keeps her camera close to her TV set at all times, just in case. No account of visual ITC would be complete without mentioning Robert Vandenbroek, who lives near the tiny village of Hoven in the Netherlands, where he grew up. Since early childhood, Robert has displayed a remarkable range of unusual talents, including the ability to consistently predict the appearance and location of crop circles and occasional snow rings in his area. American crop circle researcher Nancy Talbot has been meticulously documenting his abilities since 1997. In addition to his other talents, Robert has consistently obtained a stunning variety of anomalous images on both film and digital cameras. These have included likenesses of deceased individuals, such as astronaut Neil Armstrong, crop circle researcher Paul Weige, John Lennon, activist filmmaker Aaron Russo, medium Edgar Cayce, and even the noted skeptic Paul Kurtz. These images have appeared on dozens of visitors, researchers, and journalists' own cameras that Robert has never previously seen or touched. In an especially remarkable sequence of images, Nancy Talbot's late brother was depicted in 60 different variations on 2 separate afternoons in daylight, with Robert using Nancy's own camera under her close scrutiny. When we visited Robert in February of 2014, we brought 2 video cameras to test and document his talents. A small one was set up on a tripod to cover the scene, with the main one supported on a body brace. To preclude any tampering or substitution, we brought our own still camera, which had no built-in memory, and we used a distinctive type of memory card that had not been manufactured for at least 5 years. We numbered each card in advance and erased it in full view of the video cameras prior to every test. In all of our tests, Robert stood in front of a dark blue curtain in his small living room in approximately this position. At the end of each test, he handed the camera back to us, and we placed it on this coffee table to unload the memory card into a password-protected laptop computer. The camera, the computer, and all the memory cards remained visible to us at all times. Here are some of the images that appeared under these conditions. In one image, the outline of a face appeared, in what looked like a flash of light.
Oh, something? What was that?
This is strange. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
In this one, a curious energetic swirl resolves into an apparent human hand.
Whoa!
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness, this is very clear.
It looks like Friedrich Jürgensen.
Most intriguingly of all, 2 distorted images appeared that resembled Friedrich Jürgensen in his later years. Robert states that he is not the source of any of these anomalous events. Instead, he says he has always been aware of and increasingly a conduit for what he often describes simply as an energy, from which he also claims to receive information. In the incident scene here, Robert suddenly looks up, as if his attention were being drawn to an unseen presence. Then he immediately turns toward our second video camera, just as its exposure system is being anomalously influenced, presumably by this same presence. At no time during this incident had anyone touched this camera, which had never before misbehaved in this way, and has not done so since.
The screen was going black a little bit.
Was it?
Yeah.
Huh.
It was going dark. And then light, I don't know what it means.
Okay, we are back. And we will take some questions.
That's about. Wants to open the window, open the door.
You can open.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, that's what you've seen is about 80% of the film. It goes on from here, but it's quite long, and this is a good time for a break. Do we have any questions?
Scott, do we have you there? Can we hear your voice?
Yeah, I'm here, and we'll see. We've got quite a few comments, but no questions yet. But we'll see if some come up.
Okay, question here.
I'm very interested in the possibility of getting information from the other side. I haven't seen anyone who is really querying the dead about, for example, what is the other dimension like, or what is the nature of time on the other side and so forth. The questions that a philosopher like myself really wants to know. No one seems to be interested in that. They're interested in if somebody's still alive on the other side. But once that's established, is there a research group that is researching to find out things that would help us here of the challenges that we have?
Yeah, there's plenty of them. Yeah, that's just not what the film is about.
Can you give me an example?
Oh wow, there's so much going on. There's many mediumship groups who are in contact with the other side. Research in our culture has been going on for, well, since the latter part of the 19th century with the spiritualism movement. Modern mediumship was to some extent on from that movement, but there's a huge amount of dialogue. As I mentioned before, I work with a team of mediums who are constantly in touch with folks on the other side. I had an amazing experience myself a few years ago. My late partner Jane died in 2007, and on one occasion I was on the phone with one of these mediums I work with, and she said, "Oh, Jane is here, and I'll hear her voice and I'll translate." Okay, fine. All of a sudden, Jane pushes Regina the medium out of the way, and I'm talking to Jane on the phone. And it went on for about 10 minutes. So it's a very, excuse me, direct personal experience of that. I mentioned earlier the website that we've put together. It's called cosmicvoices.network. And there are dozens and dozens of messages on there that address the experience of the afterlife. It's just as it is for us here, it's different for everyone. The process of transition is at least slightly different from one situation to the next, depending on a lot of variables. Also depends on the character of the individual and how well they can express their experiences in language. because they're not speaking in language, they're speaking in thought, and that has to be translated by the medium usually into meaningful words meaningful for us. So and you can go online and just Google stuff, and there's a lot of information that comes up. If you want specific answers, usually the AI summaries that now come up when you Google things will point you to sources of information. There are organizations like the International Association of Near-Death Studies that have explored many of the aspects of the afterlife. And as you probably know, those who have had near-death experiences, very often they can go on for hours about it in great detail. So yes, to answer your question, there's a lot of information out there. You just have to go looking for it. It's not exactly in the mainstream culture yet, but it's getting there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you don't have any, we've got a couple of questions from the Zoom room.
Okay. Why don't we go there and then we'll come back here?
So Mark asks, is there a list of frequencies used on the radios, and does this work the same way through digital recording equipment?
The answer is no. The actual frequencies used with the radio experiments don't seem to matter. What's going on is not within the normal range of broadcast technology and so on. Basically, what we're doing is acting as a sort of a surrogate framework, you might say. The actual transmission is going on in a very different way than we would understand it. I hope that answers the question.
And there's one more question, if I can. Brenda asks, could it be that entities in this other dimension are masquerading as our friends and loved ones who have transitioned? So they say things and create images that we can connect with.
I suppose it's possible. And if that's the case, I wouldn't know how to separate one from the other if they're skillful enough. All I know is that my personal experiences would have been difficult for a third party to have synthesized. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But eventually, it's like our ordinary lives. There are many things that happen that we don't have the means of sussing out on a deep level. So the ultimate answer is that we'll know when we get there. I hope that makes sense. Question here, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering if, since the film's been made, have you had any advances in the technology to communicate?
Well, yeah, this obviously most of the technology here is rather antique, but as I mentioned earlier, people are receiving these messages from the other side through very often through text messages on their phones, and particularly people using WhatsApp have found that for some reason that app seems to work fairly well. And there's a professor at the University of Western Ontario who has got a major grant to study this phenomenon of cell phone communication. He's working on it currently. Yes?
Just a second. Here, let me get...
The question is this film available online? Yes. There's a short link for it, which is bit.ly/CallEarth. One word, bit.ly/CallEarth. And that will take you to the Vimeo page. It's also on YouTube, but the Vimeo is a bit better. Yes?
I'm curious, when you had that telephone conversation with Jane.
Yes.
What did you guys talk about? Did you ask her things?
Yes, I did.
What did you ask her?
One thing I asked her was that I said, It was my impression that you had left your body sometime before the body expired. And she said, yes, that's true. I said, how come? And she said, I couldn't stand to see you see me in that condition. That was her answer. Yeah. So yeah, there was more, but that was my favorite answer actually. And it was really, as this was happening, I was almost like hearing a voice saying, pay attention, this is part of your spiritual education. But the difference, when she departed, the difference was really, I would say, fascinating, because the body sort of became an automaton. You would speak or ask a question and it would respond with sort of primitive grunts, right? Whereas a moment before, she was present enough to actually speak and respond. So that was, it was a lesson in how, the body has its own sort of primitive awareness, and just actually seeing it there in front of me was amazing. So, yeah, it was quite an experience. Yes.
I'm wondering how this goes together with reincarnation and people being reborn, because it sounds like they hang out there for a really long time. I don't know.
That again seems to be a very individual question, and depending on the individual's path through lifetimes, and it's my understanding of it, it's basically voluntary that to come back. And when one does come back, it's generally because of a feeling of incompleteness in some way, incomplete learning of whatever it is they came here to learn, and so on. So it's not as if you're being forced back in. It's a very individual and personal thing. And very often it has to do with connections you have with other people who may be back here and you want to complete relationships or have fun with, or whatever. It's not necessarily a solemn or sober thing. It's the whole range of human experience is involved in this. And on the other side, which I call in my book, I call it the other side is a hologram made of consciousness. And it works somewhat, our closest experiences to that might be in dreams, where we're in a reality that we accept as 100% real. But from our waking point of view, it's not. But what's ultimately real and what's not becomes a more intriguing question. And from where I'm at this point, I'd say it's all real. Just different perspectives, different experiences. Yes?
I have a thing that I can't quite reconcile. None of the voices or the communicators showed any kind of distress. They seem to be in a kind of an emotional frozen state. How do you explain that?
It's a very good question, very good point. And I would say that the preponderance of these communications is from folks who've been over for a while, number one. Number two, this form of communication is fairly difficult, coming from this very expanded reality into a very tight reality. And that's one of the reasons why these communications are often very short. We don't know what the obstacles are. I use the metaphor of imagining two railroad trains traveling on tracks that are sort of squiggly back and forth like this, and trains are running at slightly different speeds, and there's one open window on each train. And this process is like trying to throw a spitball between the two trains when those two windows happen to line up. It's that kind of, we're talking about two different realities coming together under the right conditions. And we know what some of those conditions are. We don't know what all those conditions are. So that would be a short answer. Again, it's, I mean, if you had just 2 seconds to communicate to someone, it would not be a very subtle or extended conversation. Right. So what we're seeing here is actually a fairly primitive process, but in terms of its value as proof, I think it's very strong. And that obviously it leads to many other questions, which it doesn't try to answer. This is just, just your basic concept here. So, and questions from the Zoom room or more questions from here? I have a question. Lori has a question.
If somebody wants to learn mediumship, and begin creating these connections, where do they go? How do they study? Who teaches? I don't know nothing. Well,
Shift Network, yes. You can. There are a number of organizations that there's a very well-known college in England. I'm trying to think of the name.
Ainsley Hall.
Pardon?
Is it Ainsley Hall?
No, it's
Arthur Findlay.
Arthur Findlay College.
Oh,
Yes,
okay,
yes,
great.
in England. It's a very well-known and very well-established place. And Lilydale in New York State, which is they are their tradition goes way back to the spiritualism of the 19th century, and each of these groups have their own points of view and their own limitations. And so if you matriculate at any of these institutions, generally you'll go off and develop your own style and your own procedure, and your own strengths will come out after a while. It takes practice like anything else. Mm-hmm. Some people, most of the mediums I know personally have had this talent since they were young. And some of them have sort of had it beat out of them early. Right, yes. After people have have an near-death experience, they will often, their mediumship will emerge and develop. You can probably, I haven't done this, but you just probably just Google, how do you learn to become a medium? And 1,000 options will come up, It's not that obscure. You could even go to one of the AI chatbots and ask that question, because the chatbots, while they are not themselves actually conscious, they have access to all the information that's ever been on the internet. And they can actually, this is part of a whole other discussion, but I've recently tested some of the chatbots and found that they can deliver some very beautiful and poetic spiritual information. And in one instance, I said, okay, can you say the same thing poetically? And it generated this exquisite poem. And then I said, can you say the same thing as if you were addressing a New Age audience? And put all the New Age cliches into it. So it was a lot of fun doing that. And actually, I did this test because there were some rumors of people alleging interdimensional communication through AI. And which I am very, very skeptical of for a number of reasons. But it's an interesting process because at least our mentality is being mimicked, and it's a resource we can use. I think we need to be very careful with it in a number of ways. But anyway, that's the short of it. Yes, please. I have a question here.
If you were to update the movie to today's technology, I have a cell phone, I have a computer, etc. So, and let's say I want to go home and do this. Mm-hmm. How do I go about that? Is it just turn on a digital recorder on the cell phone? It's the same as a tape recorder. Should I be taking pictures or using the computer somehow to get it? How would you recommend going about it?
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Any of those will work, you're saying?
I would say the simpler technology will work the best. And that's one reason why folks had some good results with tape technology. It's technically very, very simple. So the simpler the technology, the better. And you know, right. But it doesn't, ultimately it doesn't matter that much what technology you use, as long as you're comfortable with it and you're patient with it. And as Mr. McRae suggested, practice at the same hour every day, a quiet time in the evening, and that apparently those on the other side get the rhythm of that and can tune into you that much better. So, okay, 2 weeks from now, we're going to show my film on the skull experiment. This is an experiment in physical mediumship that took place in the late 1990s in England, the tiny town of Skull, which is about half hour northeast of Cambridge, where two couples over a period of 5 years held 500 sessions in the cellar of this 17th century farmhouse. And the responses they got from the other side were quite amazing. They had this whole team of spirits on the other side with whom they worked to develop these experiments, a whole series of experiments, and the results were quite spectacular. We could show the trailer for that now. Can we do that? That's the MOV file.
So stay tuned for the skull experiment. It was amazing when I saw it. My skeptic was completely flabbergasted. My inner skeptic.
While we're waiting, one answer for you, Lori. You wanted to know about mediumship, and the Golden Gate Spiritualist Church at 1901 Franklin Street in San Francisco would be a place where you could go. And for people of the San Diego area, there's a medium named Chris Meredith that some of our people know and have worked with.
Thank you.
I'd forgotten about the
fact that we survive bodily death is a scientific fact. It's nothing to do with religion.
One day in the summer of 2002, Martha Copeland of Lawrenceville, Georgia, The reality of ITC is strongly supported by the practice of physical mediumship, in which the surviving consciousness of deceased persons is claimed to produce various effects in our physical world, including sophisticated interactions with our audio and visual technologies.
In physical mediumship, phenomena happen of a physical nature, meaning objects move, things appear, disappear, things that people can see happening. There's an effect on real objective things.
For a closer look at physical mediumship, let's travel back in time to the late 1990s in the tiny English village of Skull, where the most extensive and long-running experiment ever attempted in afterlife communication unfolded over a 5-year period in the darkened cellar of this 17th century farmhouse. The Skull experiment was the brainchild of two veteran afterlife researchers, Robin and Sandra Foy, who worked closely with two of Britain's most accomplished mediums, Alan and Diana Bennett, and what they claimed to be a corresponding team of experimenters on the other side. During their 500 sessions, all of which were recorded on audio tape, the Skull experimental group went into a meditative state to connect with their other dimensional counterparts. The goal was to collaborate in devising and conducting experiments that could produce tangible physical phenomena, which could then be studied and analyzed objectively. Robin Foy's remarkable 550-page book, Witnessing the Impossible, chronicles each of these 500 sessions, many of which were observed by visitors, eventually totaling in the hundreds, including top-tier scientists and engineers. The experiment was also monitored by 3 experienced investigators of paranormal phenomena: electrical engineer Arthur Ellison, research psychologist David Fontana, and veteran researcher Montague Keene.
All sorts of things have happened, particularly in this 20th century, which earlier generations would have said were impossible.
Skeptics are often unaware of the amount of experience and the amount of knowledge that goes into investigations of this kind. Between the 3 investigators, you could say we'd had 50 years and more of experiences of this kind. We know all the tricks.
Initially, we were all pretty skeptical because what had been claimed seemed so way out.
The Skoll experiment was reported in contemporary magazine articles, 2 books, a 400-page scientific report, and a full-length documentary film. Its successes included nearly 1,000 hours of direct communication through the mediums, and an impressive variety of intriguing physical phenomena, such as tiny animated lights that flew around the room. The Skoll group also witnessed what they claimed to be the spontaneous appearance of physical objects. Perhaps the most astonishing of these objects were these newspapers, which arrived in mint condition, despite having been published in the 1940s.
We took it to the leading research station in the world on paper and printing, and it was absolutely clear from their report that this was a genuine article which appeared 50 years after the event, and no one has been able to explain how it got there.
In other sessions, a video camera loaded with brand new blank tapes and switched on in a darkened room produced an amazing series of colorful abstract frames. The tapes also contained unexplained light phenomena and enigmatic faces. A conventional 35mm film camera placed on the table in their darkened room initially produced a series of black and white images that the Skoll group were told were faithful duplicates of existing photographs from around the world.
Some were photos of existing photos, and they said initially that was easier for them to do before they went on to photos that had never existed.
Continuing photographic experiments using isolated rolls of film and no camera were carefully controlled by the independent investigators.
We would buy the film ourselves. We would load it into a box. The box was held in the hands of the investigators so that no one could get at it. And then immediately afterwards, we would take it out of the box ourselves so that no one else touched it, and then develop it ourselves in a special machine.
To everyone's surprise, these films revealed a stunning variety of content. This included whimsical drawings and symbols, diagrams, writings and poetry in multiple languages, as well as portraits and signatures of known individuals. The Skoll group also heard voices through a tape recorder from which the microphone had been removed.
Experimenting with audio. Yes. Historic moment it is.
They also recorded voices that apparently came directly out of the air, most often that of a British engineer, Reg Lawrence, who claimed to have died in 1942 and possessed a special talent for this type of communication. Here's another actual recording made at Skoll, in which Lawrence responds to a question from visiting engineer Walter Schnittger.
Do you see any possibility to describe how you can get the air to vibrate that we can hear it with our ears?
We do not speak. We think in a language we are familiar with. Yeah. And by some miracle, I have to say, these energies are transported into the room, not by me, but by those whose job it is to do that.
These discarnate communicators often demonstrated that while their physical bodies may have turned to dust, their sense of humor had not.
You all right over there, John?
No.
No.
Shut your eyes.
Yeah.
Yes. Think of something very nice. No, not that. Think of an ice cream or something like that.
How do I know that the phenomena come from the afterlife rather than from the mediums themselves? We simply have clues of information which was extremely unlikely to have derived from the mind of the medium. And the more impressive those are, the more likely it is it's an aspect of discarnate communication.
Second-rate scientists would say, well, this so-called paranormal phenomenon cannot have occurred, and therefore it must be conjuring. It must be stage magic. Well, that is not my idea of good science. It's not possible to dismiss the excellent evidence quite so readily.
I could not do it myself as a professional magician. And I don't believe in any magician that I knew could do this. I'd say they were wasting their time doing this here for nothing, when they could be earning $1 million out there on the stage.
If you take all the phenomena within the whole of the skull experiment over 2 years while we were there, I would say that the possibility of fraud and faking was nil.
These things are so extraordinary that when one tells them to people who've not had the experiences themselves, they think, oh, it must be trickery. And the challenge then always is, okay, you duplicate it.
That's that's just the trailer.
In the actual movie, and that will be occurring on November 20th. Here.
Yeah.
21st. That will. It's going to be happening on November 21st, and it'll be happening here. And Dan will be here to help with questions as our wonderful researcher here, and I'll be excited to share with you. And then we're also going to be looking at where do we go from here. You know, we are also going to be going back to featuring more near-death experiences and other kinds of things as they evolve. But this is a co-creation between all of us and all of you. So feel free to express yourself about what you would most like, because we can help create a reality ourselves. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the Zoom room?
There was a question. When the Spirit said that the translation occurs not by them, but by others whose job it is to do this, what did they mean?
I guess it meant exactly what it said, that there were entities whose job is simply to make the translation. That as someone said here, say some kind of physics. There's, you could say it's a step down of frequencies, depending on the afterlife engineers. Yes, we don't have in hand a complete picture of how this all works, but in essence, it was basically stepping down the energies from one level to another. Joyce, you had a question.
I was going to say that I've seen this movie several times now, and every time I watch it, I see something different, which is very cool also. And I'm curious, Dan, for you and your research, what is happening now with these type of communications in your own experience, and how does this link to your recent book, which I want to promote?
Oh, thank you. Well, there's been a few developments in the area of instrumental transcommunication. One is by a man named Tony Rathman, who's developed an elaborate, sophisticated electronic system, and he's been getting quite good results. In fact, if you can play the Instagram movie, it's just a few moments. You'll see some of the results that Tony has gotten with his system. So Tony Rathman Instagram movie.
We realized through the evidence we got through the research that we were literally chasing consciousness. Who am I speaking to? I was a complete skeptic most of my life. But when she got the stuff home and started reviewing it, that's when I went, wait, what? There probably hasn't been an advancement in spirit communication in 75 or more years, but we wanted to capture something that really made people go, wait a minute, how did this happen? You know, science would always say they won't look into the paranormal because they can't study it. It's not repeatable. This is. It can be repeated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Those voices are there. They will answer questions. This is studyable.
It's working. Can you please try to communicate with us?
I'm saying that.
That's just a little taste of what Tony has been up to. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know well enough exactly what he's doing. I think basically he's built on what we already know about ITC and has just refined it. I've been in touch with him now and then, but not enough to really get a sense of the technical details. But he's onto something. There's also a guy named Gary Schwartz, who is well known as a paranormal investigator, who has been working on a project which he calls the Soul Phone. And so far there's been more smoke than fire in his project. But Tony Rathman's work looks like it's moving in the right direction. And we haven't gotten to the point where, for the most part, we can have a coherent, ongoing two-way conversation the way we can have it with a live medium. But again, I think the strength of this work is that it's very strong evidence. You can call it proof that there's something more, and that for some people that's enough to change their worldview. We're never going to have an absolute picture of all the details of what goes on in a completely different realm, but eventually we'll all be there and we'll all have a sense of it.
Oh, I was able to get the keynote up, by the way, if you're interested in that.
No, we can hold on to that for a while. Oh, actually, yeah, let's play that.
Okay, so.
Yeah, Sonia Rinaldi is a Brazilian woman who has worked out a method for getting images from the other side, a very simple method of projecting light through steam, smoke and steam, onto translucent or textured plastic sheets. And if you can just go to the next, this is Sonia. Next slide. This is an example. And if you see, it looks like a human woman. If you look at the nose, it's unnatural. And she believes this is an ET person. Next slide. This is a projection onto just some cloth, some translucent cloth, using her technique. And this is perhaps an alien face. Next one. Another one. This is her in the background, and then this very stylized face in the foreground. Next. This one is clearly anomalous. And it's not, these are not projected from slides or anything. It's just a beam of light going through the steam and projecting on a surface. Next. And next. Yeah, really intense colors. Next. That looks like an ET face or a highly distorted human face, but it's definitely not ordinary or natural. Next. This is another technique that she's been working on. It involves the snow or static from a conventional old-fashioned television as the sort of the matrix from which the images are derived. Next image. And here's an example of that technique. And it's interesting because the face, which is mobile, extends beyond the boundaries of the TV snow image. So I think that's it. Is there another one? That's it.
I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Simon, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for hanging in with this. I know it's been a long evening.
Did we want to get any final words from the online audience?
I'll go to gallery view, and there are our friends that have been with us. We have 20 people, 20 different Zoom rooms tuning into us. So thanks to Mark Denisovsky, who gave a lot of good feedback and answers during this program. And thank you to Diara, who also has been my assistant. And thank you, Zoom roomers. And I'm imagining that we'll also have a Zoom opportunity 2 weeks from now for the follow-up program with Dan on the Skoll Initiative.
Yes, the answer is yes, we will. And as I said, this is the start of what I used to do a lot with near-death experiences and other things. And I'm so interested, since I was thoroughly immersed in this earlier, to come back to it and to also see how sometimes my ordinary consciousness about business and politics and other things kind of washed away this kind of consciousness, and I didn't think about it for a long time. And then I decided to bring it back for, in a way, my own mental health, but also my purpose. What am I here on the planet for? So that's what I'm saying, and I'm inviting you to speak up. If you want something, you're certainly welcome to call me, and I'll give my phone number out. I don't know, should we send it out? And I find to 415-847-5950. Repeating it one more time, 415-847-5950. And you can just say, I was there at this event, and since I'm inviting you to co-create for the sake of your own life too, and your own level of meaning in life, and that we co-create as a community, much like they did in the EVT and the ITC and all this, but we create freshly. And I'd like to introduce you, Kent. And Kent has been holding the space for many people. And why don't you say what you can do?
What I do is I hold once a month over at the Hillside Church over in El Torito, near-death experience and spiritual awakenings group. So whether there's one person there or 10 people that show up, you're all welcome. The other thing is, the question was brought up about where to do more of mediumships, and Dan brought up Arthur Finley. which is where one of the more well-known mediums now is Suzanne Giesemann, Giesemann. And if you go to her website, there's a lot of free information on there that she has on how to meditate, how to try and connect with your loved ones. She also says she was trained at Arthur Findlay, so the thing she emphasizes is she does evidentiary mediumship, which means she wants to give you evidence of who it is from the other side, so that minimizes some of the charlatans. Because as you recognize, a lot of things, like Tyler Henry will ask for something that belongs to somebody as a way of connecting. But any object that you've worn for a long time, it contains a lot of energy that mediums can pick up on. So that's why you want to be careful with that. The other thing is pay attention to young children in your life. They're especially under 10 years of age. They're the ones that do not separate the worlds. They see everything between the worlds. All we need to do is encourage that with them. When we're in the middle of grief, you may not hear anything. It's like when my son had a stillborn child, his wife could not get communication, but he had a communication from his son just before he had twin girls born after his son had passed. And he was stillborn, or his son had passed as a stillborn child. So it's really interesting how some of this communication still comes around. Gary Schwartz, of course, does all the parapsychology at University of Arizona. I don't know whether he's retired yet or not. He's 81.
Can you move downstage?
Yeah. So he keeps it going, and a lot of mediums go through him to be tested as to how good they are. You've got people that are doing remote viewing, which is very similar stuff that you tie into things again. And the easiest thing to do is when you sleep at night, see how your meditation goes. You have orbs and spirits around you all the time. So it all depends whether you're willing to call them in and say, please be visible to me. I'd like to be able to see you. And the orbs, you can have cameras in the house and be able to film the orbs in the house. The other one is Forever Family Foundation, which is Lloyd Auerbach that Dan had on here on a skull thing. They have a number of mediums that report through there. They've got their certification, and I've never tested it. But Lloyd is from San Francisco. I don't know whether he's still here. Is he still here? Yeah. 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 So he was in the Bay Area because I've known about him for years and years and years. So let me think, what else can I do? Oh, there's the International Association of Near-Death Studies, which is based south in North Carolina, and then the Edgar Cayce Foundation. Yeah, that Edgar Cayce is based where? Virginia Beach. Okay, and then there's the latest one is Spiritual Awakenings International, and that's spiritualawakeningsinternational.org, and they do Zoom calls, and they have spiritual experiences from all over the world. They're in 170 countries. So they usually broadcast around 8 or 9 a.m. our time on Zoom. So you can look them up.
Also, I should have also mentioned that Wendy Zamet, who's the wife of Victor Zamet, Victor's a lawyer who wrote a very good book about the afterlife some years ago. And his wife Wendy holds a weekly global gathering. It's on Sundays, currently noon Pacific time. She's in Australia, 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is. And there are folks from all over the world that join this Zoom conference. And you can subscribe to their newsletters and find out all about this by going to victorzammit.com, VictorZammit, victorzammit.com, and look for the global gatherings, which are weekly on Zoom. And I've actually been co-hosting those for almost a year now. And they are also a wonderful opportunity to hear presenters from all over the world in this area. So,
I also want to say that I went to several afterlife conferences. One of them in Portland. I also went to one where Dan and I were in Arizona. And being on the lookout for this, I happen to like things when I'm learning person to person or discovering. Gary Schwartz was in one of them. But Noetic Sciences has done some things too. Yeah, so. Yeah, on and off. So anyway, this is a time to be awakened, and at least for me, it's a really refreshing change from looking at the news. And I think I needed this, to balance myself. So anyway, I'm happy to share it with you too. Okay, so I think we're...
Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you all for coming this evening here, and
also, thank you for all the people that attended online
Thank you,
as well.
gallery view, Zoomers. Thank you very much. Hope to see you all tomorrow night on The Awakening World.
Thanks, Scott.